Okay, call the meeting to order. Regular meeting of the City of Cherry Hills Village City Council, Tuesday, January 21st. Sorry for a technical delay. But let's have a roll call, please.
Councillor Safavi?
Here.
Councillor Wheel?
Here.
Councillor Brown?
Here.
Councillor Gallagher?
Here.
Councillor Sheldon?
Here.
Councillor Blum?
Okay, if we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. And the next item is something that we all get to, an item, auspicious day. Mr. Thorson, if you'd present this.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Tonight is a celebration of a journey that began over 17 years ago with an election that was held in November of 2002. That election had a ballot measure on it to determine if the city residents wanted to be excluded from the South Suburban Parks and Recreation District, and instead turn that operation over to the city's crews to maintain and operate all of the city parks. At that time, the majority of the residents voted yes for the exclusion. It took 2 more years for the order of the exclusion to become final, and in December of 2004, the city began maintenance and operation of the 6 parks containing over 50 acres of land, as well as 25 miles of trails. As part of that exclusion, the city was required to pay South Suburban nearly $10 million for the conveyance and transfer of all those facilities. That amount was disputed for quite some time. However, in 2008, the city began making annual payments to South Suburban for the property. It took a quick 10 years, but the final payment to South Suburban was made on December 1st of 2019. In sum, we have officially paid the final mortgage payment, and I think that deserves a round of applause.
Thank you.
The city owns Dahlia Hollow Park, Woody Hollow Park, Volunteer Park, Black Mirror Commons, 3 Pound Park, and John Mead Park, and all city trails, free and clear of any encumbrance. This is really a significant day for the city. So instead of the traditional burning of the mortgage, which would no doubt set off our smoke alarms here, I'm going to present each council member with a plaque commemorating this event. Actually, I'm going to have Jessica be Vanna White tonight. And inside this clear plaque, and you can show them to the audience, is a copy of the full satisfaction of judgment that was recorded with the County of Arapahoe, and it closes the chapter on the exclusion process. So with that, I congratulate the mayor, council, city staff, and mostly our residents for persevering through this, and now it's all ours. So congratulations.
Would you like a picture for the... Where would you like us? Okay.
The short-term contingency, evidently.
I would like to add my thanks to the audience, and particularly I see Mayor Tisdale, who was instrumental in shepherding that. Thank you, Doug, for all you did, and thank you, everyone here who was involved with that vote. It's a nice example of the community voting and finally getting it done. It took us longer than we thought, but we're here. Audience participation period. If anybody wants to speak, you're certainly welcome. I have one sign up. Kevin Iverson.
Wait till it comes up on the agenda.
It's just for the, which one are you going to speak on, Kevin?
The potential membership in Citizens Advisory Task Force for the Master Plan.
That's probably not a public hearing. If you'd like to say it now, if you'd like to give your piece now, can you do that? Could you do that?
Good evening. Just by way of
Name and address, please, Kevin. Thank
Kevin
you.
Iverson, 1170 East Tufts Avenue, Cherry Hills Village, Colorado.
Thank you.
By way of background, I was a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission that handled the 2008 master plan. And I thought it might be appropriate, given this agenda item, to kind of share with you some things we did when we handled the master plan. And I'm not suggesting we did it the right way or the only way or the best way, but we certainly learned some things. First off, we had a working group, and according to our city code, the Planning and Zoning Commission is supposed to handle, they're responsible for handling the master plan. So the first member of that working group was 7 members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And the other, I guess, big member of the group was, they called it, I want to get this right, a Master Plan Advisory Committee. And these were 7 residents that were chosen by the city council. And the way they did it was each city council member chose somebody. And what kind of had an interesting twist, the person had to be from the district that the council represented. Why they did it that way, I'm not sure. I think they were kind of looking for some geographic dispersion. That's all I can guess. And I think the other thing that's kind of important is that prior to picking these people, a document was developed that said, okay, this is what these people are going to do. Kind of like a job description. Said, okay, this is your roles, this is your responsibilities, this is how often you're going to meet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you kind of say to yourself, well, if you're going to ask someone to sit on a committee, especially one that lasted like a year and a half, it's kind of nice to know, what are you going to do? What's the responsibilities? What's my job? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that was kind of key. The other thing, or other part of the group was, we had the consulting firm, and then we had city staff. So that was the entire group that put together the city master plan. 7 members of city council, 7 residents, a consulting firm, and the city staff. Now, I think the key thing also to kind of, I guess, I'd like for you to share with you is what we did, because I think that's kind of relevant to future and how you guys handle this master plan going forward. To give you some idea, one of the first meetings we had was, okay, how are we going to do the outreach to our residents? I mean, that's key, obviously, if you're going to do a master plan. So the consultant came in and said, okay, we think you ought to do surveys to 25% of our residents. We think you ought to do focus groups. We think you ought to, do an open house. So we spent a lot of time talking about that. We talked about the pros and cons and everything. And the working group, all together, we said, nah, we don't want to do the focus groups. Statistically unreliable. They're great if you're selling hamburgers, but not for a master plan. What we would like to do is we'd like to send 75% of these surveys out to our residents. And go ahead, we'll go ahead and do the this open house deal. And also during that, we also discussed, okay, so what are we going to put in these surveys? And so we really talked about what are the issues, what did we want to hear from? I think at the following meeting, we then really got down and dirty, and this group actually went through the surveys. The draft was presented by the consulting firm, and we spent just, it was a long meeting, going through line by line, okay, what were the questions, what did we want to know, and probably one of the most interesting things is we left a space at the end of the surveys where we could just, the residents, they could just put in there whatever they wanted. And what was interesting when we got them back, we kept looking at these surveys, we kept seeing buried power lines. And I could tell you, this was on nobody's radar. Nobody had a clue that anybody cared about this. But it kept coming back to us. So I guess one of the lessons we learned was don't assume you know what the residents want because you're going to be surprised. One of the key things that we tried to do was an outreach to what we called, I guess you guys call them the churches and the schools and the clubs. And so what we did is we set up a specific meeting with those groups, and we met with them and we said, okay, what's important? What do you guys feel like? What do you see going on? And to be honest with you, it was a real disappointment. Their attitude, they came back and they said, God, we love the city, things are great. Your expanded use permit process is a pain. I wish you guys would change that. And we said, okay. And we said, well, what do you think about the new city hall? And they said, don't care. Okay. What do you think about the other big issue was the houses being built? Do you care anything about that? No. What do you think about our trail system? It's nice, keep it going. But the punchline is we didn't hear anything from them. Okay, they had their own narrow focus of things they wanted. And we said, okay, fine, we tried, we reached out to them.
Kevin, your time is up, but I wanted to,
Oh,
if you want to wrap
I'm
up.
sorry.
Yeah,
Well, the punchline of all this is you guys are going to put together what do you call it? A Citizens Advisory Task Force. And you're supposed to decide who's going to be on it, okay? My first observation is I don't know how you guys can decide what's on this Citizen Advisory Task Force based on what you've been told so far. Right now, you've been told the task force will provide input on the master plan and meet at key milestones. Well, I asked the question, how are you going to get people to serve on this when you don't really know what exactly this task force is going to do? How are you going to ask citizens to sit on a task force, say, well, hey, we want you to serve on this task force, but guess what? We don't really know what it's going to do, but you're going to get some input.
Thanks, Kevin. We appreciate the comments, and it is up for discussion tonight. Appreciate those, and I'm sure there are thoughts about council dues.
You know what? I guess I wish you would give me a little more time because I think what I have to say is very relevant. Because the other thing is that I question why you would put, all these churches and everything when I don't know if they really care. and how much input they do. Thank you.
Thank you. I did want to open it up too. I think that I noticed some other people in the audience who may want to speak to some of these issues, and these really aren't public hearings. So if there's anybody who wants to speak to the Cherry Hills Farm Homeowners Association issue, or trail signs, or anything else, now you're perfectly free to say your piece now. No takers? Other than the applicant, of course, yes. Okay. Just wanted to make sure that everybody had an opportunity. All right. Reports from city boards, commissions, and committees. Anybody wish to speak? I see we have some members. Yes? No? Look up.
I'll hold for the trail sign discussion in case it'd be available if you have any questions.
Okay. Consent agenda, item 7.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second. We have a motion, a second. All in favor? Item 10, new business, Resolution 5, Series 2020, approving agreement with the Cherry Hill Farm Homeowners Association for the grant of a revocable encroachment license. Who will take this?
I will take that.
Mr. Goldie?
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. Before you this evening is a request from the Cherry Hills Farms HOA for a revocable encroachment license for the installation of a comfort station on Cherry Hills Farm Drive near the intersection of University Avenue. The HOA has requested to install a comfort station along the south side of Cherry Hills Farm Drive, just east of University Boulevard. The comfort station would be used for their security personnel that patrol Cherry Hills Farms subdivision. The applicant is present to speak about their request and answer any questions that council may have.
Speaking for the applicant, Mr. Tisdale. Name and address, please.
May it please the council, good evening. My name is Doug Tisdale, 4662 South Elizabeth Court, Cherry Hills Village. I'm the vice president of the Cherry Hills Farm Homeowners Association. Present this evening with me are Ms. Kelly Digby, who is the president of our HOA, our architect, Chris Fisher, and our counsel, Charlie Smith, and also present, not speaking, are several residents of Cherry Hills Farm who are here to support. May I ask that you raise your hands if you're here from the farm to support? So it's a good turnout from the neighborhood. We're before you this evening to express our support of Resolution Number 5, Series 2020, approving an agreement with Cherry Hills Farm Homeowners Association for the grant of a revocable encroachment license. Cherry Hills Farm Homeowners Association respectfully requests that the council approve and adopt the resolution. Cherry Hills Farm is a neighborhood of approximately 110 homes located at the northeast corner of University and Bellevue. Cherry Hills Farm has employed a security service in our neighborhood for almost 40 years, which security service works collaboratively with the village police department in patrolling the farm. Now, through those years, our security contractors have sat in a car, running their engine, using gas 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, keeping warm in the winter and cool in the summer, and then driving off-site when it was necessary to respond to the calls of nature. This resolution will approve a revocable license for the purpose of installing, constructing, using, maintaining, repairing, and replacement of the improvements located at the University Boulevard entrance to our neighborhood, including this new comfort station for use by our 24/7 security contractor. We've been working hard over the past few years in order to accommodate the feedback that we have previously received from the City Council and from the village staff. We have incorporated very important design elements in the comfort station as a result of that feedback. And these include things such as the "Please proceed" sign, not having a window along the entryway side, setting the building back from the driveway, and buffering the building with landscaping by the entryway here, as is illustrated in the illustrations that we have here. All of this in an effort to mitigate any sense that drivers should stop. This comfort station will not constitute a closing off of the streets or the privatization of the public streets and the farm, and nothing about its appearance or its function will serve to close off or to privatize the streets or to give the impression that they're closed off. Our collaboration with city staff throughout this process has been designed to find a legally acceptable and appropriate mechanism for addressing the need of our security contractors to be warm in the winter, cool in the summer, and to have comfort relief during both, and to house the necessary communication that we have for communications. This resolution accomplishes that, and we ask for your support tonight, and we thank you sincerely for your communication and cooperation throughout. We have submitted as part of the packet the results of a survey, and I would like to introduce now Ms. Kelly Digby, who is the president of our association, who can give you a few more words on that. And then, of course, the four of us here are prepared to respond to any questions from council. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Digby.
I'm behind you,
Here,
sorry.
right.
Hi, Kelly Digby, 21 Cherry Hills Farm Drive. I did want to follow up. We thought it was important for you all to know what sort of support there is from our community. And when we originally came forward with the proposal, we did a survey for our neighborhood in 2015. And as Doug mentioned, we have about 110 homes in the neighborhood. And at that time, we only had one family that wasn't in full support of the comfort station. Again, in 2019, we did the same survey. And again, we had overwhelming responses from our survey, and we only had one family out of the 110. I think it's also worth noting that the original builders of the neighborhood, the Alperts, still reside in our neighborhood, and they came to our meeting last year, and we have 100% support from them as well. So we thought it was valuable for you to know the type of support from the neighborhood, and that we have overwhelming support for it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we are now prepared to respond to any questions that the council may have at this time, and please feel free
Well,
to direct them to anyone.
Thank you very much. We'll go down the line then. Any questions for either the applicant or Mr. Goldie? Councillor Blum?
I just have one brief question. Do you still maintain the cars out front in that parking space that say the farm? And what's the purpose of those then?
The purpose has been for turnaround, and periodically, of course, the police department makes use of that space should there be a police encounter on University Boulevard, and they'll pull someone in there and pull them out of traffic that way so that they can respond to any questions that the officers may have. And we do have a vehicle. The goal is for the security contractor, the goal is to go to an electric vehicle, because we won't have the requirement to maintain a gas-fed vehicle that would be parked there and that could charge at the station, and that would be utilized to go around. So there's still some space there for parking for those other purposes, but we wouldn't have that security vehicle there all the time out in front, constantly running its engine.
Thank you.
Councillor Sheldon?
Thank you, Mayor. Doug, thanks, good presentation. Kelly, thank you. Very happy you guys are back in front of us again. And Happy that you're doing so without any kind of variance request. That was super important to me last time we discussed this in a meeting that we had, and I'm appreciative of the fact that you were able to figure out a non-variance way to get this through, or get it in front of us. So I do have two comments. One, I guess, is for staff. Jay, is there a period of time in which this revocable license would be good for and then expire if a building permit wasn't pulled?
I will have to look to the city attorney for that.
Typically, what we've done on expanded uses is 1 year with a 1-year renewal available if the applicant were to come in or something like that. I just want to know if it's out there forever.
I'm reviewing, but this will be, it's revocable whenever. So there's no real conditions upon which the city would have to wait. It's completely, it's a license
Yeah.
that is at the discretion of the city.
So we currently have no condition on the length of the building, how long we'd let them go until they pull the building permit, but it could be added as a condition if council so chose.
I think that might be wise. Charlie, right?
And,
Yeah,
and
maybe you
let
wanna
me
add
invite our counsel, Mr. Charlie Smith, to address that directly to the counselor.
Thanks.
Mr. Smith, and your name and address, please.
Yes, sir. Charlie Smith. I'm with Brownstein, Hyatt, Farber, and Schreck at 410 17th Street in Denver. So it's a revocable easement, as Kathy, city attorney, noted. And to build the comfort station, there's a condition that we get the building permit. But part of the purpose of the easement, besides just the comfort station, is to document that there are existing improvements and landscaping and things in the entryway. And the HOA will now formally be saying we're responsible for maintenance of that, which has been the case for years, but not documented. So one reason it's not just this is a 1-year license or something like that is it's the intent that part of the relationship would continue on, subject to the city's right to terminate at any time anyway.
That is true, that this has been a good opportunity to include the existing improvements within the terms of this license. It's not an easement, just for the record. It's a license, which is a different.
Sorry if I said easement.
Yep, just for clarification.
Okay, so I don't know if it makes any sense for us to add a little twist to it whereby we suggest that the license exists, but a building permit must be pulled within X number of days, months, years. Something, it sounds like you guys are motivated, right? The whole community wants to do this. So can we agree on something whereby within a year, or I'd be okay with 2 years, but just something, put some bookend on it so that we know when this thing's going to happen?
If I may, on behalf of the board of the HOA, I feel comfortable in saying that it would be our intent to pull a building permit certainly within 1 year of the issuance of the license.
Okay. Okay, my second comment, I noticed as I was reviewing my packet with all the information on this that unlike an expanded use permit, which is the terminology for our old process by which an applicant would come in to build something like this structure, that would typically fall under something called an expanded use permit. We've now changed the nomenclature to a site plan or site development plan, Chris? Site plan. Essentially, those terms could be used interchangeably, although site plan is our new terminology. In this case, we're not asking that the farm, or you're not proposing to us, nor I believe are we asking for the farm to come in with a site plan, because it doesn't require one for a variety of reasons. But in that case of a site plan or previous expanded use permit, we would typically require the applicant to put up a deposit for covering the city's legal and engineering fees to review said application. We haven't asked for that in advance of this meeting tonight, or at least in the public forum. You have not been in front of us yet, so we wouldn't have heard this yet. I believe our staff has been working with Charlie on this over the last maybe few days or a week. I would suggest that it's fair for the citizens of the village to not have to flip the bill for the city attorney to review this license agreement, and that the association pay for the cost of the city attorney to review it. I know that the association has to pay for your own legal counsel, I get that, but what I'm proposing is very standard practice in other jurisdictions for many types of applications that come in, for an applicant to pay for the city's time and their staff. So I'd propose that if we do move this forward and approve this tonight, that one of the conditions be that the applicant pay for the legal associated with this round of submittal, meaning the last several months' worth of time involved in this, or years' worth, but not going back to the old submittal that from 2015 or whatever it was. Those are my two comments. Thank you.
Councilor Gallagher.
Doug, I think this is a good solution to a problem that obviously has been a concern to the community, that particular community, for a long, long time. Give me some context. 40 years. It's a long, long time. When did this rear its head? You know, in terms of needing a solution beyond guys and cars.
In fairness, Counselor, I could have presented this evening the original plans that we had for something that date back over 30 years ago, because they were resident in a closet in my house for most of those 30 years. We quite seriously addressed this in 2015 and came up with a slightly different site plan that contemplated putting it in the center, but there were comments from councilors saying, wouldn't it be better off to the side, and so forth. So I can say we have been collaborating with the city for at least the last 4 years in looking at this, and in earnest addressing this problem over the last year relative to coming up with a notion of a revocable license agreement, which parallels other agreements that we have in the village at other places around the village. I recall many years ago sitting on the dais and dealing with various trail uses where people had installed things and there was a revocable license associated with that, or where we had installed on someone's property and needed a revocable license from that individual. But over the last year, seriously, in terms of this plan, but much longer than that in terms of approaching various avenues towards solution.
Yeah, I'm just glad that this can move forward, and I think it's a good win-win.
Councilor Brown.
I also just want to reiterate and express my appreciation to the HOA for working through this and really addressing the concerns that were raised by the council and the staff. I do really appreciate it. I know that it's a big compromise, and I think it's a great compromise. It addresses your needs. I think it addresses the concerns raised, so I do appreciate that. I agree with Councilor Sheldon's comments. I see your point about not leaving it completely open-ended. I would be comfortable making the bookend broad enough that there really is I don't want you to have to be here again anytime soon. So, I'd be comfortable setting it at, if you think you're gonna request a permit within a year, I'd be comfortable at setting it at 2 to make sure that there's plenty of time to address anything that comes up. But I do think that's prudent, just given experience in other situations where we have things dangling out there that then just kind of get lost in the works at some point until we dig them back up and they start to interact with other issues. So I would be supportive of those amendments to the agreement as long as the HOA is supportive of that as well. Oh, and thank you again for bringing forth the support of the community. That is very important in my mind whenever you're going to do something like that. So thank you.
Councilor Wheel.
Hi, Doug. Kelly. I should, in sense of disclosure, mention that I'm a resident of Cherry Hills Farm, as well as city council member. I can certainly attest, having been to HOA meetings for Cherry Hills Farms, the enthusiasm and support that Kelly, Doug, and the HOA have for this, which I think is great. And I do think there is a broader issue than Cherry Hills Farm in that the activities in Cherry Hills Farm, we have extra eyes and ears and patrolling on the street, which benefits the city at large because it can free up some of our policing resources. So that's a good thing. The fee question, Jim, what have we done in the past? We have had irrevocable licenses. What have we done with respect to, reimbursement for the city on that?
Well, this one's a lot different than the ones we've done. The other ones were all handled by staff because it's a standard form. Usually the city attorney is not involved in that type of discussion. This one was unique and had some unique characteristics, and I know also went back and forth between the attorneys. So I would say this one was handled a little differently than your standard encroachment. Most of those have been for installing a security camera in the public right-of-way, which we can handle fairly quickly.
Okay, excellent. And I would add one point, I think, that came up at the Homeowners Association, that this is basically funded as well. So one of the delays that could occur in requesting a permit could have been lack of funding, but I think that's worth mentioning. And I do appreciate I know there have been a lot of hours of trying to accommodate and make sure that the people were heard, that the council was heard and respond. So thank you for that effort. Yeah, I think it's a good plan.
Councilor Savavi.
So as one of the newer members of the city, lived here for a few years, and council, I've been really privy to this for the past 12 months or so. I'm glad it's finally moving to this direction, that we're getting support. So kudos to you. Let's get those folks from the car into a decent place. In terms of 2 years that was mentioned, sounds good. In terms of reimbursing the city, I think our citizens pay enough taxes in this city. I don't like to nickel and dime our citizens. With that being said, I would probably rely on whatever the city has done in the past with cases like this to proceed as such. But I do not like the idea of having it get on top of the taxes that our citizens pay now, haven't paid for something like this. But with that being said, I'm very interested to move this forward, pass it, and be done with it. So I'll leave it as that.
Any other comments from councilors? I think it's for my own part, I think it's a great solution. It's beautiful. I think it's going to be very nice, and it's going to be welcome. I mean, it is a little bit, for everybody here, it is a little bit different because these are public roads, obviously. So it's a solution of having comfort station, and cameras that were mentioned too, which actually are going in throughout our community. I think maybe a half dozen now of our subdivisions now have cameras in, which have proved very useful as a matter of public safety. So I think this is a matter of public safety as well as green. It's a green solution and as well. So plaudits and accolades for getting this done and coming forward. If there are no more questions from council, I think.
Motion?
You bet.
Sneaking in again from behind. I agree that we're fine with 1 year or 2 years. We're motivated to do this, and that we don't want that to be open-ended for you all. Similarly, could we ask that the fees could be the same way, that we say like up to $5,000 or up to a certain amount, especially if we're just considering this last go round, there wasn't really that much. I can't imagine that it would be higher than that. Would that be fair, so that we're not leaving that open-ended as well for our own community? Because I hate to follow up with them to kind of have that open-ended and then be, well, what does that look like?
If you'd like me to chime in just a little bit on that, I have done a preliminary estimate that is right in line with what the thinking I've heard tonight of this year only of fees. This was a unique agreement for sure. And so there was some extra time spent in, but it is slightly higher than the number that was just mentioned, but not significantly so. And I can provide more information if council would like for this year's fees. Yeah.
Councilor Sheldon, did you want to?
2019, 2020.
Did you have a thought?
Kathy, could you elaborate on not much higher? I'm just trying to decide if we should ask the applicant to pay for the whole thing.
Slightly over $6,000.
If it pleases the applicant, I think it is the right thing for our citizens. If you're standing here, Kelly, telling us that you want to cap it at 5, if you can agree to the cap at slightly over 6.
That's fine.
And we'll just cap it at that. What the actuals, let's say, not to exceed $6,500.
That's fine.
And whatever the actuals are, she'll provide you with the accounting as needed. But again, it's more of the principle of it
Oh, no,
for
I
me and for
understand.
my constituents, for the citizens to know that they're not paying legal on something that is applicant-driven.
Absolutely. And similarly, we're trying to spend our neighbors' money the same way, so I totally
Totally.
get it. I just didn't want to
Okay.
leave it open-ended.
And certainly, and I think it's fair to need to know what that, are we talking $100,000?
Yeah,
Are we talking
exactly.
10? What are
Exactly.
you, so yes, I can
So
see
we
why you
agree.
would need to
Yeah.
know.
I think that's a good resolution and fair and consistent with a lot of the
Yeah.
past history of what we have done with expanded use permits and other similar times that I've been on council about this, about the applicant paying fees. Particularly since this is more than just this is actually involving,
It's unique.
an understanding, it's unique understanding about who's going to maintain this, because it was designed originally, as I understand it, for a security gatehouse, and then it was never done, and that's kind of where we are. That's why we're here, the history of all of this. So I think that is a fair solution, so that's good.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So if,
Sorry
I
to
think
interrupt.
that we're saying if someone prepared a motion with that condition, and the conditions that I think are,
I could read it, or Randy, this is maybe your
Sure. Okay.
do you know the two conditions that we've talked about?
The 6,100 and
60, not to exceed 65.
6,500. 6,500.
And then a 2-year outside date
Fair
to
enough.
pull the building permit after the granting of the revocable license.
Okay. I move to approve Resolution 5, Series 2020, approving the revocable license agreement with Cherry Hills Farm HOA for the installation of a comfort station and certain other improvements as described in the agreement, with the condition that the HOA provide documentation that all utilities are available and can be constructed to serve the facility as needed prior to the final city signature, and additional conditions that the HOA assume responsibility for legal fees not to exceed $6,500, and that a permit be drawn within a 2-year period from approval of this motion.
have a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Any other further discussion? This is a voice vote, as I understand. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations, applicant. Go forward, and you're welcome. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 10B, which is Council Bill 1, Series 2020, repealing and reenacting Articles 1 through 12, and adding a new Article 13 to Chapter 18 of the Cherry Hills Village Municipal Code concerning building regulations. I guess not much interest in this one. Mr. Goldie, is this your issue? No, I'm sorry, Mr. Kramer.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, good evening. This is a consideration on first reading for updating the building codes, electric codes, and national green building standards. We have the chief building official who's been designated by the city, Steve Thomas, who is here tonight with Colorado Code Consultants. So he will run through this presentation for you tonight. Just be aware that we will have a second reading for this, which I believe will be the public hearing in a month. So that'll be the next steps for this process. But Steve will walk you through this. And I got to say, I came into this process midway, if you will, and working with Steve and his team, it's been a very encouraging process, and it's very impressive, actually, the knowledge and experience that Steve brings, as well as Chuck, to this whole process. So I'm glad to turn it over to him.
Thanks, Chris. Mr. Mayor, City Council, my name is Steve Thomas. I'm president of Colorado Code Consulting, 4610 South Ulster, Suite 150, Denver, Colorado. Want to introduce Chuck DeVores. He's the assistant building official, and he's the one that does most of the work. I get to take care of all the problems that come up, which are not a lot in Cherry Hills, to be honest with you. It's good to see many of you that I've seen over the years. This process is something we do about every 2 or 3 years to update the codes. We adopt a national model code, and then we have some local amendments to those codes to address local issues and those kind of things. And when you walked into the building this evening, you didn't even think about safety, I hope, right? Anytime you walk into a building, you don't think about, is this building safe? People assume that buildings are safe when they walk into them, and that's because we have building codes. So we're not the first jurisdiction to adopt the 2018 codes. Many of the jurisdictions around us are doing the same thing at the same time. We're right in the middle of everybody, what's going on. Denver just adopted it, Greenwood's in the process, so other jurisdictions are doing the same thing. So it's important that we stay current with the same codes in our areas. It makes it a lot easier on the architects and the contractors that work in our jurisdiction. So we like to try to stay current. Changes to the amendments, what we amend, pretty minimal. A lot of them are just cleaning up language. There was a couple of sections that were new sections in the 2018 that replaced what we already have in our amendments, so we can delete that. I am a believer of as few amendments as we can have. I think we do a good job of writing those codes at the national level. I'm involved in that process and have been for many years. We are keeping the fire sprinkler requirements into the code, just like we have. We've seen that it's pretty well been accepted by the contractors and builders, and so that's been a pretty good success. We did have a meeting with the contractors January 30th, long time ago. That's how long we've been working on this process, to discuss the possibility of adopting the 2018s, presented the changes to them. I always like to say I teach codes all over the country, and I like to say that this is the least amount of updates that we've seen in the codes in many years. There's no huge changes this time, which is really a good thing. Contractors were supportive. They felt it was appropriate to go ahead and move to the 2018 editions of the code. Changes in the code, like I said, are pretty minimal. We have some more requirements for solar energy since that's a new popular thing. Emergency vehicle charging stations. And if you have those in the building, requirements for that. So we're seeing a lot of things for new technology addressed in the codes from that standpoint. Let's see. So we've all seen this. It's a thing that we do every couple of years, and would encourage you to go ahead and move and update the codes that you have. Have one more thing I'd like to say. I'd like to thank the council for using Colorado Code. It is our 20th anniversary being your building department. And me personally, it's my 30th year being your chief building official. So we really enjoy working with Cherry Hills. I think hopefully we do a good job for your citizens and for you. So with that, I'll just open it up for any questions you may have.
Nope. No questions here. Anything, Mr. Kramer? I did have one question. Now,
yes, sir.
Will there be a regular meeting of contractors in Cherry Hills Village?
Yes, sir. We do this every year. We get together with all the contractors and say, okay, what's going on? Are there any issues? Are there things we're doing that we can improve on? So absolutely.
Have you decided a date for that?
Not yet.
We have not decided a date for that. We were also going to use that opportunity to help update some contractors and builders on the updated code modernization process. And I think we wanted to see, at least get through tonight first, but to make sure we were on the right track. And we'll probably work on setting that up in the next
month or so.
Exactly
Yep.
right.
I do have a question.
Yes, sir.
It's not related directly to this, but indirectly. When you have your contractor meeting, what are the beefs that contractors have? What are there common threads that come up year after year?
Well, we had one that was confused as to what we're requiring in our plan reviews, technical things we have, but really, energy was an issue, and that's where there was confusion as what we were looking for. The energy codes are really moving ahead, and so we see that. But generally, it's a really good discussion. We have a good relationship with the contractors. They understand what we need, and we understand they need to get their jobs done. So we don't actually get a lot of beefs. You've got some great contractors in this town that no other jurisdiction has what you all have.
I have a comment for staff or maybe a question for council. I don't know about you all, but I read Chris Kramer's staff report on this. I did not read the 45 pages of text about the update to the code. And where I'm going with that is, I don't know if it makes sense if we're going to do this every couple of years, and I'm fine leaving it the way it is right now, but maybe this should be a consent agenda item that can get pulled if anyone has comment number 1 about anything on here. But as much as I appreciate you coming in and speaking on this, if our staff is telling us that this is the direction that the IBC is going and this is where Colorado Code is recommending we should be going, I don't know that any of us are going to stand up here and say no or why. I don't like the smoke alarms must be interconnected with the, I mean.
I think, but I do enjoy seeing you every few years.
Thank you.
So,
if I could just, it does take a roll call because it is a change to our code. We have to have a roll call
Okay,
vote, so it
good
can't
point.
be on consent agenda.
Thank you, Mayor.
And I know the city attorney has more to add.
I'm going to pile on a little here, but there's some statutory requirements that are reflected in your
Okay.
code. That it's a process because you're adopting these codes by reference. These are
Okay.
giant books of codes. And
Great.
so there's a specific process for that allows the public to have access to the code and look at them.
It is not often that I will say in public, especially now that we're on camera, that I did not read a part of my packet. But Earl, I didn't read this whole packet. You would have.
But you're right. This is one of the easier votes we have every year. Is there any more comments? Mr. Wheel.
Yeah, I had one question that's more about formatting. We've gone through a whole exercise on simplification, and there was work in here. I did read the 45 pages. I had more time on my hands. We consolidated the fee structure. But there were a number of places where, like appeals process and things like that, that there were virtually identical text, event after event after event, or section after section after section. And I wondered if it made any sense to think about consolidating those out of the individual sections and just, like we did with the fee process, putting an appeals process section in there. And so
every one of our codes, so we have the International Building Code, the International Residential Plumbing, a ton of codes. Every one of those has the administration chapter in it, and that's where that repetitiveness comes from. Now, we'd have to talk to the attorney, but some jurisdictions delete all the chapter 1s in all the codes and then replace it with, and that's the administration chapter, and then replace it with a single amendment with all the administrative information in it. So it's really is a format thing, and I don't know if Kathy has a comment on that or not, but it's not unusual.
Well, I'm the Johnny-come-lately in this room on the history here, but it would seem to me that sticking with what we've done before is actually the most efficient in terms of time, and just adding on the additions. I see your point, absolutely, Councilor Wheel, but it also allows for each code, whether it's residential, electrical, plumbing, or whatever, it's pretty clear and set forth when you look in that section of the code. So it kind of is 6 of one, half dozen of the other, but it's a little less work, I think, ultimately, the way it's set up now.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just chime in.
Mr. Kramer?
The only other thing I would add to that is we do have some contractors that come in to pull just a specific type of permit only relative to one of the codes. So the biggest one I can think of are electrical permits. And so, it might be slightly more user-friendly to have it repeated throughout, just in case somebody's really there, just to look at the one code only, and then doesn't catch the single time that we repeat it for all the codes. So it might be a little bit more user-friendly, especially for those electricians, frankly.
Councilor Reel? Yep. Councilor
Mr.
Swaby?
Mayor, I'd go ahead and make a motion.
Okay.
As a home builder, since I have to live with this, I'll go ahead and I move to approve Council Bill 1, Series 2020 on the first reading, repealing and reenacting Articles 1 through 12 and adding new Article 13 to Chapter 18 of the Cherry Hills Village Municipal Code concerning building regulations, adopting by reference with certain amendments the 2018 International Building Code, the 2018 International Existing Building Code, the 2018 International Residential Code, the 2015 Green Building Standard, the 2018 International Mechanical Code, the 2018 International Plumbing Code, the 2018 International Fuel Gas Code, the 2018 International Energy Conservation Code, the 2017 National Electric Code, and the 2018 International Fire Code, repealing all ordinances in conflict therewith and providing penalties for violation thereof.
Second.
I have a motion and second. This requires a roll call.
Counselor Safavi?
Yes.
Counselor Wheel?
Yes.
Counselor Brown?
Yes.
Counselor Gallagher?
Yes.
Counselor Sheldon?
Yes.
Counselor Blum?
Yes.
Okay, that passes unanimously. On to agenda item 10C. That'd be, who's presenting? Ms. Black?
That would be me. Good evening, Mayor and members of council. As you know, signs for the new Village Trail were installed last fall following approval by the Parks, Trails, and Recreation Commission. The Village Trail is part of PTRC's ongoing effort to make the city's bridle trails easier to navigate. The trail is a loop that incorporates part of the Highline Canal Trail. Signs designating it the Village Trail have replaced our old 4-digit numbering system on these trails. The trail and the new signs were publicized in the Village Crier and on the city's website, and feedback from our residents has been largely positive. However, staff is seeking direction from council regarding 2 signs that direct trail users back onto the Village Trail from the Highline Canal Trail. There has been a concern that these 2 signs and their locations could direct additional Highline Canal traffic onto local city trails. Prior to this project, the city received feedback from multiple residents during the Trail Passport program that the signs for these trails weren't visible and that the trails were very difficult for residents to find. Therefore, when we installed the new Village Trail signs, we moved these 2 bollards to be more visible to allow users to navigate better. However, with the close proximity to the Highline Canal, it's possible that additional users may venture onto city trails. In the past, this is something that council has expressed concern about. At their recent meeting on January 9th, PTRC motioned to affirm their commitment to the Village Trail and recommended to City Council that the newly installed signage should remain in place so users can easily navigate the trail system. Staff's recommendation is also for the new signs to remain in place. I'm happy to answer any questions, and we have Chair Eber and Vice Chair Wolf here if you have specific questions for them as well.
Councilor Blum? Councilor Sheldon?
I don't have any specific comments, but I'd like to know if either of our PTRC guys have any comments about this. I'd like to hear maybe from them if that pleases the council.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, members of the City Council. Robert Eber. I chair PTRC, or whatever label we want to put on it. Councilor Sheldon, that group. To my left, also here is Vice Chair Fred Wolf. He is really the main architect who took this task upon himself to see if we could come up with a village trail as part of our mission to kind of encourage getting our residents out and enjoying our trails. The genesis of this, as Emily mentioned, was that we started off with an idea of looking kind of at the numbering system and with an idea to try and reformat the numbering system to make a little more sense for the people. And part of that was that it took a little bit of a life of its own, that we should come up with something to encourage our residents to get out and use the trails, and so what could be better than a village trail. So our expert and resident commissioner, who is out on the trails every day, if not twice a day, is Fred. So he took it upon himself to try and design for us a village trail that you see on the map. Is the general overall trails, but specifically the village trail that you've probably seen as part of your packet. The idea behind this was that we went through our standard process. We publicized everything. It eventually was put into place with an idea that, frankly, we heard, I don't believe, any negative comments at the time about the idea of a public and a village trail. And we've even gone so far within PTRC at Fred's hard work was to try and come up with other little sub-trails that will connect to the village trail to be able to allow residents to move throughout the village on all the different trails. Those are coming later, but they are a little bit of foreshadowing for you right now to understand what it is that we're trying to work on to get people out and to make use of our wonderful trail system that we have. As part of that, the village trail, we, and Fred in particular, walked every single foot of the proposed village trail, looked at the angles and everything for the different signage, and with city staff came to a conclusion of where those signs would best be. And in fact, they were put there. And so that was the genesis of how the village trail came up. We are cognizant of the idea that we wanted to not necessarily focus and divert people onto the village trails, but at the same time, they are public rights of way in public parts of our system. And so we could not, nor would we want to, preclude people necessarily from making use of those individual trails. So a couple of the signs, my understanding is, and Fred, you've had one interaction, and I believe in your packets tonight you have another letter that one resident in particular wrote to you about some concerns about the way this village trail system is working.
Just, sorry to interrupt, just to clarify, that letter is on the dais tonight, so if anyone didn't get one, please let us know.
So we were asked by the city manager in our December meeting to take a look about whether or not those couple signs merited a relocation or a different orientation. And PTRC unanimously believed that they were well placed and that they actually solved a problem in terms of being able to continue to have people routed onto this village trail. We were concerned, and all the placement that Fred was able to see was that there were certain turns wherever this village trail went, and we wanted to be able to continue to direct people onto this village trail. In light, I think part of our thought when we looked at this again in December was that this one comment was not to be minimized in any respect, but it was one comment against the many, many comments that we received in favor of the village trail and the signage system. So it largely would be considered but not persuasive in the context of being good government to bend at the will of one individual commenter about a concern over the trail marking system in light of especially all the positive comments that we had. Let me turn it over to Fred a little bit also, because he was the one who had a personal interaction as well.
Yeah, I actually, I think it was last spring, almost a year ago now, I think I met this woman on the trail, and I had my clipboard and I was taking some notes, and she came towards me and stopped and she said, "What are you doing?" And that gave me my opportunity to give her the explanation of what we're doing. And she did not have a good reaction to that. I believe she said she's lived here 37 years and she loves our trails as I do, and she walks them all the time, and she doesn't see the need for any change. So I'm not surprised at that. Change is hard for people. Who told me change is only good for babies or something? I don't know. But there were two signs, and those signs are right here basically at Mansfield and the Highline Canal. And the other sign is down here at the Highline Canal and the trail, which is right near the headmaster's house for Kent. When I designed all this, I walked the trail in both directions, as if to say, if somebody's walking this way and they need to know where the trail is, does that sign accomplish that? Turn it around and come the other way, does that sign accomplish that? So there was a lot of thought that went into this, and I'd be more than happy to meet with the lady again and show her our plan. And I have 7 other trails here in the village that I've got laid out that I, at some point, will be presenting to you. I'm going to present it at our next PTRC meeting. But it takes advantage of as many different areas of the village as I can. And I think it's a good system when you look at all 8 of these trails. So we'll continue to work hard at it, and I'll continue to talk to people about what we're doing. And there are people that I know that this is going to be
Fred,
a problem with.
Fred, could you
Highline
speak
Canal.
into the mic?
Excuse me?
Just speak in the mic, please. Thanks, Fred.
Well, with the Highline Canal and all of Harriet Mayor's work, and obviously that's just outstanding. People are concerned all of a sudden of all these people coming from the north, from Denver, coming into the village with our underpasses under Hamden and under Colorado Boulevard, and all of a sudden we have these people in the village. They're coming down on the High Line, and they see a trail that goes off to the right or off to the left. Are they going to take that? Well, my view is it's going to be very rare that they're going to take that right or left. They came down on the High Line, they're going to stay on the High Line. Because of the pea gravel surface, it's easier to ride your mountain bike, it's easier to walk, and they're not going to venture off into our village on our trails. I think that's going to be a very rare thing, if you will. So I think her concern can be mitigated.
Fred, what exactly do these signs look like? Can you describe the signs?
We have one
Can
here.
we take a look at it?
Sure.
While he's getting that, just to make sure I understand correctly, there's only 2. These are the 2, or these are just the 2 in question?
These are the 2 in question.
Okay.
Basically, wherever the village trail makes a turn or something indicative of a need for a directive sign, these are placed to allow
About how many
the
of them in
peepers.
total are there, do you think?
I think 45.
Okay.
Now, that may sound like a lot of signs, but most of those sign posts already exist. And we're just taking out
Yeah, okay.
the numbers, if you will, the old signs, and replacing it with the exactly same size of our village trail. So I don't think we're cluttering up the system with more posts. We do have to add some additional posts, but I think probably 25% are new posts. And I'm sorry, we
Sorry,
don't have
back to-
our post that was in there, so Jay stole
don't
it.
have
Councilor Gallagher.
How are these signs going to integrate with the Highland Conservancy's signage that's going to go through our village?
So they're not necessarily going to integrate because they're really doing totally separate things. We'll be bringing the Highline Canal signs to PTRC in February or March, and then after that to City Council. But there's really not a lot of overlap between what the village trail signs are doing, which is helping people navigate our local trails, and the Highline Canal signage, which is really just showing people the context of where they are on the High Line, what the rules are in this section of the High Line, and that type of thing. And those signs, to address council's prior concerns, aren't going to show the Village Trail or any other local trails coming off of the Highline.
Jessica, is there any way to post this?
I'm afraid. Any other night.
I would also go ahead and, of those 45 signs, most, if not the vast majority of those are not on the Highline Canal. So Fred informs me that there are 10 that are on the Highline Canal. Our placement of the Village Trail signs along the Highline Canal was designed as a way specifically at either a turn or something that would otherwise make it more difficult for somebody to complete the Village Trail. So we were not specifically trying to integrate with Highline Canal Conservancy type of signage, but at the same time, we were very cognizant that we do not want the Highline Canal to become Billboard Row. And so we tried very hard to keep our signs where possible, not on the Highline Canal, and still accomplish the goal of accomplishing this Village Trail.
Yeah, and my comment is these two signs are at critical points because you move off the High Line. So you miss this turn, you got a problem. Yes. And I think it's very important that we clearly identify and keep people on the prescribed route.
That's correct.
Councilor Brown.
Oh, wait,
I'm sorry, Councilor Sheldon, I apologize.
I do actually share some of the same concern as Michelle, the woman who wrote the letter in. With that said, I'm not in favor of redirecting non-residents because I think that's the purpose. We want our trail system to be there for the purpose of our citizens. It's a tough predicament because we don't want to dissuade our residents from going down these, and we have to sign them in. But how do you tell the non-residents, don't come down our trails? How do you tell the people coming from Denver and coming across the future Hamden Pass? I guess where I kind of land on this thing is that I am going to defer to our PTRC guys. I got it right that time, Rob?
Perfect.
And your committee is making a recommendation, and while I think that I actually spoke about this at a meeting, I don't know, sometime in 2019, where I said I am not in favor of seeing our signs promoting our offshoot trails, our village internal trails off of the High Line. I said that in a meeting. I do understand the goal here, I think, as far as getting our residents to enjoy those trails. And if you don't let them know where it is, they're not going to be able to enjoy them. So understanding that predicament, I think I'm going to defer to you guys. What I'd like to do is maybe get a report back from PTRC a year from now and 2 years from now and see how activity's going on those trails and see what kind of users, if there's any way to classify what kind of users we're getting on those trails. But I'll be curious to see what happens. But I think I'm in favor of going forward with PTRC's and staff's recommendation. Thanks.
Councilor Brown.
Which is a great segue because I too share those concerns. And I think one element that we don't know yet is that while these signs aren't going to integrate with the Highline Canal signs, the Highline Canal signs are going to be much more prominent. And so I actually feel like once those Highline Canal signs are in place, the concern actually might be diminished at that point, because if you're on the Village Trail, you're going to be looking for the very small Village Trail bollards. If you're on the Highline Canal, you're going to be looking for those large, consistent Highline Canal signs. And so I'm actually optimistic that once that is in place, even with additional traffic from an underpass, to the point that you made, it's a completely different appearance. The width, the crusher fines, it looks different, it feels different, and it'll have much more prominent signage keeping people on the trail. So I guess I feel the same way. I think, there are a lot of recommendations to leave it as is. I understand why they are where they are. I do have concerns about, doubling or tripling any traffic on our local trails. And one way, I know we're not going to, sit out and count people necessarily, although, Fred, you walk the trails so often, and so many of you do, that you probably have a good sense. But, certainly if we get complaints from people who are adjacent to those trails that either traffic is dramatically increasing or that it's increasing in a troubling or concerning way, then, you know, that's certainly something we can look at. But I guess in general, I'm in favor of leaving things as it is for now, particularly until these changes have taken effect on the Highline Canal and seeing what effect that eventually does have in the end.
Councillor Wheel.
Now it's time for my mea culpa, Dan. I had hoped to get out and actually see the sites where these signs are, and I have not, while I was reading the, no, I haven't had a chance to do that. And I'd kind of like to have the benefit of that, because without pictures or some other, it's a little foggy to me what the issue really is and how much of a problem we have. I suppose I do have a bit of a bias toward not encouraging a lot of outside traffic onto our trail system, maybe chastened from the roundabout discussion around, you know, through traffic, albeit cars versus people. But even as recently as tonight, I listened to a lady talk about, you know, how she was robbed and you know, not in favor of having a lot of in favor of minimizing the amount of traffic, although I'm sure she'd understand, you know, Cherry Hills Village residents. So part of me says you all have good judgment, and I would defer. The other part of me would kind of like to maybe postpone this for a future meeting, next meeting, and actually have a chance to see it in the flesh and understand what the issue is firsthand. So that's my comment.
I guess the one comment that I would make in light of that is that just as the folks came before you involving the guardhouse gate, and they took a number of surveys, and there was always one family who was in opposition. To date, this is the only complaint that I know of. I believe. I'm looking over at Emily to see if we have other ones, but
Oh, you have more?
No, this is the one that I'm aware of.
and so I guess my only comment would be is I appreciate the trust that you have put in PTRC. I think as a matter of good governance, acting upon the whims and comments of one person when we've heard so many others would be irresponsible for us as a PTRC. And that was largely the basis upon which I think a number of us looked at this as saying, we are not minimizing this person, but at the same time, to make a change, we don't think it's merited at this point. And, you know, whether it's a 1-year review or a 2-year review, I don't think that would be something we wouldn't be doing anyway, frankly. Any type of use is always up for reevaluation, and I think that would only be a good thing to do anyway. I think it's important for us not to be fooled with the idea that nobody will find their way onto our local trail system, but the same way we allow traffic onto Quincy or Color Boulevard or anything else, these are public spaces. They are open to any member of the public. We don't necessarily have to encourage or promote, you know, say go here. But to the extent that that ends up, I think the comment was made of whether there's more traffic or more traffic with increasingly poor impact is really the criterion, because just like we don't like speeding on Quincy, we also don't like people using our public trail system for non-beneficial purposes as well. And, you know, there may come a time when we have our police force ticketing speeders on the Highline Canal. We may have them monitoring our trail system, because that's the price we pay for allowing our residents and having these wonderful trail systems for our residents to make use of.
Councillor Savabi.
I think you summarized it very nicely. You know, for me, the way I look at it is, as much as I love to get these trail to ourselves, I don't want to share. Let's keep it for our residents. The reality is, in all conscience, I can't say, you know, plant a bush in front of the sign so it's less visible, or move it back, or we just can't do that. But I'm in agreement. You know, we keep close eyes on it. Let's see what happens. So keep it as is. But, you know, if we start having problems and issues, we got to revisit it. So that's all.
Let me just add that the way the trails are laid out right now, we've intentionally stayed away from too many crossings of busy streets. There are 2 crossings of University, one right at the light at Quincy and University that already exists. People cross there all the time, but that's going to be part of the Woody Hollow Park Trail. And the other is by the athletic field of St. Mary's. Now that's the trail I'm on every day, but I backed away from making that part of the Woody Hollow Park Trail so we don't encourage people to make that crossing, even though I think it's perfectly safe. You just have to wait for the break in traffic from both ends, and horses cross there every day. I cross there every day, but we're not encouraging people to necessarily take that trail to Woody Hollow Park. We have an alternative. But all the other trails are contained within the village, and they don't have any crossings that I would deem as unsafe. So.
No, and you know, I have to also tell you again, I have walked few of those trails, and I think what you guys have done is makes sense. I don't get lost, right? Even if I do it for the first time. So kudos to you guys. You've done a nice job. I think that all of us, what we're saying is that, again, you know, we just don't want to trickle more folks into our trails, but at the same time, we got to be a little bit. We can't go and, you know, block a sign just for that purpose.
Well, once again, I've never met anybody on our trails that I think, where are you from? You from Aurora? You from Denver? These are all people that I think are within the trail system. And I know many of these people, not necessarily by name, but I call them, they're my trail friends. I see them all the time. And I think they're all residents of the village. So,
Mayor, I've got one more comment.
Councilor Sheldon.
I guess I have a question maybe for staff. How did this arise to be a agenda item even? I mean, we're talking about fixing something that I'm not sure there's a problem to it. We have staff recommending we leave it alone. We have PTRC recommending to leave it alone.
we have a class for you.
Thank you. Yes,
Dan.
my acronym class. I'm a bit concerned that we're being asked to vote on something that seems like there's a non-issue there. I guess I would like a explanation, I guess, from staff as to how this made it on the agenda.
Amazing. Well, no, it was brought forward as many complaints do. They come through council, and it was brought forward by, in this particular case, the mayor that expressed that somebody had made a complaint that maybe we should have these further away from the Highline Canal. And in the past, the council had decided that it would be a good idea not to have these things advertising local roads right adjacent to the Highline Canal. So I requested that the PTRC re-review these 2 particular signs just for that event and make sure that's where they want them. And of course, that's where it is they wanted them. And it was brought to you just to make sure that we clean up and everybody's on the same page that these 2 signs are close to the Highline Canal, which has been a little bit contradictory to maybe some of the direction in the past.
Okay, thank you.
So if I can sum up, I think the statements here basically are to wait and see how it goes and take this. And I take your comment to talk to Ms. Dorman about this. That would probably be useful. I know you already have. I do think there are some, I'm interested in seeing how it happens too, but the line off of Highline Canal, of course, goes down and really kind of dead ends at the Buell. It goes Cherry Park. Well,
It goes all the way to University.
Well, it goes to University, but then stops at University. Dead ends there. It'll be interesting to see how that works out, and I think the council's sense of let's see how it goes makes sense. But I did to answer Councilor Sheldon's question. It really was a sincere question because there were comments on council about do not put our trails on Harriet's maps, and that was a clear directive to the Highland Canal Conservancy, is don't include the village trails on the Highland Canal maps. So, and basically the PTRC makes recommendations to council. Ultimately, the council decides where all these signs go and where all the trails go. So that's why I thought it appropriate to bring the council to resolve, and I think the discussion's been good back and forth about some of the concerns. Obviously, there's safety concerns and there's issues. As Chief knows, we had an incident where we had a year ago where we had the people using the trails to come in and then rifle through cars that weren't locked. And they're using that trail as well. So there is a balance between public safety and access to our trails that we need to be aware of and cognizant of, and those residents there need to understand that that's part of it too. And so I think that we ought to be the reason it's on the agenda is because I wanted to vet it, and so we understood what we were doing with our eyes open about these issues.
Yeah,
Mayor.
I emphasize, we are not in any way minimizing anyone's concerns about the trail system. I just think that, if we have an opportunity to get a critical mass of people thinking one way, that's fine. A single person when I'm weighing the scales of public comment that we've received, it didn't lead us to think that at this point in time we have a reason to reevaluate it.
Yeah, I think this has been a very healthy process, and it's gone through PTRC, staff has reviewed it, PTRC has recommended that the signs remain where they are, staff has recommended that, and I'm ready to make a motion that we keep signs where they are.
Do we need a motion, or can we just not do anything?
Well, there's a motion, yeah.
But they are where they are. If we don't do anything, they stay where they are. I mean,
Probably should make a motion just to be.
Yeah, for clarity. I move the newly installed signage should remain in place so users can easily navigate the trail system.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation.
And Jay, we can get that one sign put back up again at Mansfield and the High Line?
Yes.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Mayor.
Agenda item 10D. Discussion regarding potential membership in Citizen Advisory Task Force of the Master Plan update. This is a discussion item only.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, the next item is no vote will be required for this. We're not having an ordinance or resolution. This is simply a discussion item to get council's input on a key aspect of the master plan moving forward. As a reminder, we had previously discussed that one of the key elements for feedback throughout the master plan process is going to be the creation of the Citizen Advisory Task Force. It's a common structure used, obviously, we heard tonight, is used in our previous efforts with the previous master plan. It had a different name, but the function is very similar. The Citizen Advisory Task Force has a lot of different ways to staff that body, including one opportunity for City Council to appoint members to that task force. It is envisioned that the task force would meet at key milestones throughout the process, and that to respond quickly to some of the points that Mr. Iverson brought up tonight, I thought they were excellent points. There is an opportunity, I think, for City Council and the Planning and Zoning Commission to provide some input on this now. Waiting until after the consultant is on board might possibly delay that, and if the parameters of that task force were set after that was to occur, given the deadlines with the crier for publishing for vacant seats, it could be theoretically April before the CAT is even formed. And given the fact that the consultant is coming on board in February, the idea is that we would want to keep momentum going as quickly as possible. So staff is reaching out to P&Z as well about some of these questions. But in short, the staff is looking for feedback on the size of the task force, the membership spots, and the process for appointing those members. In the packet, I was hoping to have a slide, but in the packet, there is a table laid out of one possible way to staff this task force. I should note, it is just a starting point for a conversation. It's just a recommendation to outline one possible way to do it. But the purpose of bringing this here tonight is to get council's input and direction on how this should be formed. So there's a lot of different ways to go about this, and we can talk about what some of the options are. I don't want council to get the impression that what was in the packet is by any means the only way to do it. It absolutely is not. But what's outlined in the packet is really a combination of two different methods for staffing that task force. One is reserved roster spots. The idea being that certain stakeholders would have the opportunity to have representation on the task force, and those stakeholders could include the planning and zoning, PTRC, churches, clubs, schools such as Kent Denver or St. Mary's. The numbers laid out in the packet outlined 7. Again, Mr. Iverson pointed out that in the previous process there was not a lot of input from those stakeholders, and that very well may be true. Again, that's why we're bringing this to you here tonight. You will probably know better than anyone what kind of input would be best, especially from those kinds of stakeholders. The second method for staffing the task force presented was the resident roster spots. That's more the traditional opportunity for boards and commissions, whereby applications are put out, people submit their applications, and council could do an interview and then appoint. The memo outlines 7 roster spots in a way to conform to the 7 council members that exist, providing some sort of balance and harmony there. But again, all of these roster spots, the total number is up for debate, and I think staff is recommending that. I personally have seen some task forces that get as high as about 30 folks. It's great when there's absences because you always have a good group, but it does get sometimes really unwieldy, and complaints start to emerge because there's very little flexibility for scheduling, and the discussions sometimes drown out some of the voices when you get a group that large. Too small, obviously you don't get a clear representation or a cross-section of the community. So I think the task at hand is to always find that middle ground, that balance between a wide voice, but also make it workable moving forward. So this is really just to kick off a discussion and input from City Council. So staff is available to help answer any questions or provide any other information that council might have.
All right.
Sorry, I was going to say, before we dive into too much specific discussion about any proposal here, I was wondering, because I have almost a completely different suggestion, and so I certainly go in any order, but
Is that okay? Absolutely. Councilor Brown, you're recognized to go
thank you.
for it.
Mr. Iverson, I really appreciate you being here. I almost feel like you read my mind. I couldn't agree more with everything that you said, and interestingly, not even having served on that committee, I was involved in the master planning process, but didn't serve on the committee, didn't even really know how it had been formed. The first thing that came to my mind as well was we need to define what the role of this task force is. In my mind, as I've always thought of it, but certainly up for discussion, in my mind, the role of the task force is a sounding board. People that, planning and zoning is very clearly in our charter the drivers and the leaders of this process, but they do need people to say, to bounce ideas off of, because we can't take every single issue out to a referendum of the people. So that's how I always envisioned this group, is that they're a sounding board. I also know that master planning process is a lot of legwork, and everyone is volunteer with the exception of our very dedicated staff. We just need more hands, and so we need certain skills that are involved in that process. So starting with that vision in my own mind of what the task force would do, I think that what comes to mind is that we are primarily a residential community, always have been, and I believe that's just inherent in our identity. And as a result, our city is funded almost exclusively by residential property taxes. And so I feel very strongly that every single member of the Citizens Advisory Task Force needs to be a resident of Cherry Hills Village. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't bring perspectives from some institution that they're also involved with, or parks because they're out using the parks and trails every day, or but I feel very strongly that they need to be people who live here and who basically in the end are going to be paying for all of it. So that's kind of the first thing. The second thing is that, while I see the idea behind having reserved spots on a task force, I think I can't even imagine how those people would actually get selected. And I think that the issues and the contentious nature that would create between competing groups, but how they'd be chosen, I just don't even know how we would do that. And my natural instinct was, and it's confirmed now by what Mr. Iverson said, was that their interest really is pretty limited to their own kind of narrow interest and involvement in the community. And it's not to say that they don't value and appreciate the community and want to do their best and be involved, but they're not as impacted. And a lot of these institutions also aren't taxpayers of Cherry Hills Village. So not only are they not as impacted by the decisions of the master plan, but in the end, they're not really footing the bill for it either. So I was thinking more along the lines of, ironically, having no background in the way it was chosen before, something almost exactly along those lines. Council members could appoint someone from a geographic district because there are differences on the east. We're a small city, but still, there are differences. And so that way we make sure that at least the geographic districts are covered. And then what I would like to see us create as a council and working with staff is kind of a list of areas of diversity that we would be interested in seeing on the task force, whether it's your age, how long you've lived in the village, your family situation. Are your kids grown and you're an empty nester? Do you have toddlers at home? Do you have school-age children? I'd almost like to see a laundry list of all of the different ways in which that diversity plays into our community. And then, so we would have perhaps 6 appointed people, and then we would have a body of whatever the magic number is, a body of people that are selected through the interview process that we have. And we would use that list to say, okay, well, this person, addresses these 3 areas that we're trying to find. This person, addresses these skills or these perspectives. So that's how I would prefer to see us go about it. It's a completely different proposal than what's in here. And that being said, I'll just throw that out there for comment.
Councilor Safavi.
Sounds good. Sort of what I had in mind, guys. This is a good start. It's sort of what you have, and actually it's a little bit of what Katie just presented. For me, I was looking at almost a task force that comprised of 11 individuals, and the reason I came up with the 11, I was looking at the P&Z, PTRC, churches, club, and lump up the school, Kent and St. Mary together, and give each one seat. I don't see the reason why should we go ahead and give the churches 2 seats. The idea here is that, again, we want to have a representation or representative to bring us information, ideas, the thought process, input that we may be missing otherwise, right? So to me, again, P&Z 1, PTRC, churches, club, and the school. That's 5. And then we have, and so going along with what Katie was saying, that I think is very important that actually some selective residents that know the village pretty well are involved. And so 1 from each district, and that gives us 6. And that's how I came up with a number of 11. So in that case, again, as we're moving forward, they can bring the input from the residents, from their area of interest, folks they know. And in the event that if you have 11, if a handful of them, 2 or 3, are missing from a meeting, still there are enough people to go ahead and move forward with it. So that's all. Thank you.
Councilor Wheel.
Well, let me try and complicate the issue a little more.
Idea number 3.
I think there's validity that the institutions are different in a number of ways than the residents. And maybe it makes sense to think about separating them. And what I mean is have basically the CAT or Citizens Advisory Task Force be a function of, be comprised of citizens. And I think there is validity to the geographic representation comment, that it's different depending upon whether you're east or west or north or south. So that's a good thing. And maybe a few at-large positions to get some diversity into it to make sure that we have newer residents, older residents, those sorts of long-term residents, short-term residents, et cetera. So, maybe 6 to 9 or so in total there, and then maybe a separate grouping which deals with the institutions. Maybe they don't have as much to say and they don't have as many concerns, and it would be a less involved process, but an opportunity to collect themselves up. And I do think that there are probably different perspectives, one club versus the other, one school versus the other. So having relatively few meetings, but being a little more embracing of the institutions individually is, I think, a good thing. Plus, I think we've all agree that they're a big asset to the community, and so to ignore them, I think, would be not a good thing to do. So I'd suggest we think maybe more along the lines of institution, less involved, but get their input, and then citizens, geographic representation, and perhaps a few at large to make sure we have the proper diversity.
Councilor Gallagher.
Sorry, Mike, before you go, do you mind if I say, I forgot to mention one thing, which was that I too agree, and my vision for how we could work with the institutions was not, they're public meetings, anybody can come and give their input. We're not saying that these are the only 9 or 4, whatever the number is, these are the only people who can comment. My thought was to, obviously we post the meetings and anyone can come, be more proactive, reach out to every institution in the village and ask if they would like to identify a point person on their end that we would more proactively communicate with, invite them to come to the meetings rather than wait for them to see the meeting posted somewhere, to be a little more proactive about including them. That was how I thought we could do it.
Councilor Gallagher.
So, just in general, the institutional impact, I don't think it's important, but the reality is we have 6,000 people who live here, and this is about quality of life here. It's about driving this master plan, reviewing it, and when you look at the 7 sections of the master plan, it is about quality and has obviously very quantitative aspects to it, but overridingly, it really is, it's leading to a qualitative statement. And for that reason, I think overwhelmingly, this needs to be citizen, people sitting on that committee or on that advisory group need to be citizens. And a cross-section of citizens who have been here for 40, 50 years and brand new citizens.
Councilor Sheldon.
I agree with Mike and Katie. I'm totally on board with what you guys are proposing. I think we're coming together with some kind of hybrid here, and I know that's what staff's been, the purpose of this is for staff to get some input on this. I also firmly believe that it should be a citizen-driven committee. If we, in a perfect world, if we could get the institutions to be represented there, they would show up with citizen representation in a perfect world. A member from the church and a member from the school and a member from the club, so on and so forth, are citizens. I don't know if we can require that of them. Maybe we could. Maybe we say you have a seat at the table if it is a citizen. Certainly, there are citizens of each one of those groups that are citizens of the village. But otherwise, I think we're on the right track. I'd like to hear some more discussion about it.
Councilor Blum.
I believe you guys have, Katie and Mike have come up with a very good idea here. Mike, a couple of concerns I've got. One is I think it's very important we have representation from each council district because it is so different from the west side. And for example, living in a gated community that's totally different from what may be on the west side of the community. The important thing, and I think also to add the diversity, maybe we advertise after we select 6 people from each of the districts and advertise openings for 5 or whatever, conducting interviews to add the diversity. Because I think, Katie, I agree with you that the diversity of the representation is going to be very important. There are people who lived here for 50 years. People moved in the last year, and they they were looking for a certain quality, and they may or may not see it, and they can contribute something that they may not know. I think the most important thing is who's going to lead this group, and I think it's got to come from P&Z. And my thinking all along was maybe we have 2 people from P&Z take the leadership, chair the thing, because task really goes back to P&Z to present this to all of us. So if we have the 6 people from the districts, we have P&Z, 1 or 2 leaders there that lead their chair this, and then open up to the community and like Dan said, it may be somebody from the church that lives in the community that can represent what their concept is for the church. So I think we're approaching this from the right perspective. I think there's a general agreement as to where we're going here. But again, I think the most important thing is to have that leadership from P&Z, because somebody's got to leave this. Somebody's got to take the bull by the horn. I sat through the last one with many meetings that my wife made me attend because she was on council then. But we need the leadership, I think, to try and get to this point.
Okay, I think we are kind of reaching some consensus here. I agree too. This is P&Z, baby, and this needs to be reporting to P&Z. I want they should be the ones who are who are accepting these recommendations and putting these recommendations into the master plan. One thought I had is that instead of being passive and accepting applications like we normally do, we could have a system where each council member appoints 2, and seek out people who we know are good. Who should be on this, from each district, and that kind of puts the onus on us to do that rather than sitting back and being at the mercy of whoever applies, but rather be more proactive and get out there and say. Because I do have some members who have expressed interest to me, citizens, and I know, and even those who may be reluctant, I think maybe twisting their arms to get them on this may be good, and if we reach out and do that. So that's a suggestion for how to handle this rather than the ordinary passive way of whoever applies. So that's my thought.
I think that's a good point because that may then short circuit having to go through the interview process because you have to advertise it, you get the applications in, review them. It takes time, and I don't think we have the time. And I think that may be the expeditious way if we can each point 2 people from each of our districts.
Yeah, the concern I have with that is that we're going to miss some really good people in that process.
Mm-hmm.
You have people who definitely want to apply and want that opportunity, but they're going to get passed, and they won't have that opportunity. That's my only concern, is that we.
Well, how about a hybrid?
And that's why that's where I started. I have we've talked about this before, Mike. The commission interview process is challenging because you have people volunteering their time and their heart and effort, and then when they don't get it, they're disappointed. And even that's a little different because that's a rotating thing and there's always sort of another chance. In this case, there's not really another chance. So it's hard to go recruit people and find people and say, gee, I'd really like for you to be on this task force, but oh, by the way, you may or may not get on it. So I started there and I said, well, maybe it's some sort of hybrid. Maybe we appoint some so that we can go out and recruit specific people that we think, have a lot to bring to the table and kind of guarantee that they'll be part of it. But then we do have some spots that we throw it out and say, who's interested? What I don't necessarily want is for us to just recycle the same people that have been involved. I mean, and as much as I love all of us who have been involved for so long, we need to have some other voices. And I don't know if we necessarily know who all those voices are unless we throw it out there and say, you know, who's interested. It also occurred to me, you know, maybe they could apply to be appointed, but that's why I sort of settled on we appoint 6 and then we interview another, I don't know, 6, 7, 10, whatever. I haven't come to a thought on what the right number is. You know, another thing that I think is overlooked in this specific proposal is that we're trying to get constituencies. The particular proposal has a lot of emphasis on our institutional constituencies, and it does include planning and zoning, and it does include parks and trails, but it doesn't include, for example, arts. You know, that's been a little bit of a controversial discussion in our community. It doesn't include the equestrian community. They're not quite as organized, but they're clearly a very big part of Cherry Hills Village, and we'll certainly hear from them whether we ask for their opinion or not. And there may be others that even I'm not, you know, thinking of. So I think that's why I say I'd like us to almost brainstorm a long list of, you know, and we can find people who sort of help us fill a lot of boxes of diversity on that committee. You're an equestrian who also has young children, and you know, you go to church at some church in Cherry Hills or something. So, but that will require looking at a big picture, right? And kind of looking at what everybody, it'll be a puzzle. It's more of a puzzle than we have had to do in the past.
I think to build
Councilor Savabi.
Yeah, I think based on what I'm hearing, and I think they're all valid points, great points. You know, one way is to go ahead and actually ask for the volunteers, talk to them, understand the level of diversity, and based on that, make a decision collectively as what type of diversity or experience or expertise might be missing, and then say, okay, now we can go ahead and look for talent A, B, and C, and we don't have anybody from, you know, District 3, so let's go and start recruiting, actively recruit. So I do like the idea of give it a period of time. Is it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever? Come with a deadline, see who we get in as a volunteer, and then very quickly be proactive on filling the holes, the blank, with our diversity. So that's another way to approach it. I still, you know, think that, you know, having a handful of people, I understand this is all about the residents, and I'm all supportive for it, honest. But I do think that, you know, the school, the churches, the clubs, they gotta have some level of representation. If you want to go ahead and minimize the number, I'm okay with that. That's why I made a recommendation. Don't have one for St. Mary. Don't have one for Kent. Don't have 2 for churches. But I still think that having a person from a church that goes and talks to all the churches and brings their input makes our life easier. So anyway, I think a hybrid of what we're talking about would be fruitful. Back to you.
Councilor Wheel.
Well, yeah, figure out how to operate this. I do think that I agree with Mike's comment that it's got to be largely citizen, resident driven. And yet, I think if the issue is quality of life, you know, it's been pointed out to us on a number of occasions, for example, that Kent is very generous with their property, and that's quality of life, you know. So I think we should hear from the institutions, and it's not just Kent. I mean, others do things that benefit the community and benefit the quality of life. And I think even if it's not on an equal footing with the resident voice, I think having a subgroup and hearing from, and I also believe that the institutions are unique in their own situations, whether it's one church or another church. They may be very different places in their life cycles and other things like that. So I think having some subset where we can collect those voices broadly versus, and at the same time preserve that residential strong residential voice, I think would be good. Good to do.
Councilor Sheldon.
I think it's also important to remember that this citizens task force is not the end game for dialogue, right?
Input.
There's going to be a whole bunch of methods in which citizens can provide input. Citizens and our institutions can provide input. So if, for instance, there's a constituent that's left off, equestrian, arts, Kent Denver, St. Mary's, Rapo Tennis Club, you pick it. They're gonna, they didn't lose out on their opportunity to reach out and give their input on this master plan. They're gonna have plenty of opportunities to show up at the different workshops and charrettes and surveys and online dialogue and all those things. So keep that in mind, that we're never gonna accomplish it where we get everybody. And we shouldn't try to, I don't think. I think we need to come up with a strategic lineup and
Well,
go
I think
with that.
you raise a really interesting point in that depending upon what the role of the task force is, you know, if this is a do the legwork task force, I doubt you'd have people chomping at the bit from our institutions to, you know, go to weekly meetings that are going to dive deep. So again, I mean, it's a little bit cart before the horse, but that's kind of where I come from, is that I don't know how those groups would agree upon who's going to represent whom, because they are all very different. And then to be honest, I just don't know that you'd have a lot of people.
Let's ask Chris what the scope is.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I would like the opportunity, if it's all right with you, just to, I'm hearing a general shape of consensus, and I'd like to repeat it back to council and see if it sounds about right, according to what council's saying. It also then provides an opportunity for us to be able to relay that back to the P&Z on February 11th, because they obviously have an opportunity to help shape this also. Through that process, I am going to ask a couple of clarifying questions that are still a little unclear to me about some of the direction that we might have received. But first of all, what I've heard is the overall roster makeup should be made up of residents, and I think I have heard consensus that it'd be a mix between appointed by council and then those that apply through the traditional boards and commissions process. Does that sound about right? So I have a question right here at this, we're getting right off on that appointment process. Is that each individual council person from their district appointing somebody who lives in their district without any other council input on that? That's
Yes.
just their own individual appointment process?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm doing good so far. For the appointment process through the traditional boards and commissions, but that's still just through the application. We can create some desired groups that we want representation: new residents, longtime residents, folks who use the trails, folks who are members of the country club, et cetera. I would just offer, I don't have to tell you, council, who you get sometimes through that application process is, a little, you have to kind of wait and see what you get sometimes.
Before you continue, can we talk about how do you publish for that and the timing of that publication and how it relates to the timeline of our master plan process?
We have the application in the February issue that's being printed right now.
You're preparing for it.
Yes.
In anticipation of whatever we come up with tonight.
Correct.
And if it turned out that council wanted to only do direct appointments, for example, totally reasonable. It's certainly a way to go.
And you can pull it.
We would just basically say, thank you for your interest. Let us outline other ways for you to become involved in this process. So
Or you could give those applications to the council person and say, consider these people. All right.
100%. So I two different groups. The third element that I've heard, and this is the one area where I probably will editorialize and request a little bit, is for the leadership and to possibly have P&Z have a role in that. I personally strongly agree with that. So I do think that I think I've had some conversations with P&Z members specifically about my recommendation is for a P&Z member to chair this group. I think that makes all the sense in the world. It's another opportunity for them to uphold their responsibility to help shape and guide this process throughout.
Chris,
So
can
that's
Can you go back to what Dan asked on the timing? Because I've got the same question. What is the schedule, and when do we need to have this, when do you anticipate having this committee ready to go, the task force?
So right now, the process for, it would go in the February crier, which then we then have a designated window that we leave it open after that gets published. I believe that's 3 weeks is what we typically do. Is that correct?
Deadline's the 28th.
Yeah, the 28th is the deadline, February 28th. And so then at that point, we would need, I believe the typical process, and forgive me, I haven't done this, but I believe you would then designate 2 council people to review those applications. And then I think, in fact, I'm actually supposed to make sure that if that is a process you want to utilize, I need to get that information from you tonight about which 2 council members would review the applications, conduct the interviews, and make the appointment recommendations to the rest of your council members. But then, you know, that would kind of depend, how long that takes probably depends on those 2 council members' availability. And, you know, we would need to set up interviews, so we would probably give them a couple of weeks. So realistically, best case scenario, we're probably looking at late March for an appointment. And I'm saying that out loud, looking at the rest of staff who has more experience with this process. Does that sound about right?
And just one thought to throw out there is that if council is appointing some people, would there be any consideration of having planning and zoning interview for the other positions? Just a thought.
I can tell you, I think they would appreciate that opportunity a lot. I think I've gotten a little bit of chatter that they're feeling a tad bit left out of this process right now, and I think it might be important for us to turn over a bit of this process to them. They're very qualified people.
We could certainly add P&Z members to the interview process with the 2 council people. That's certainly possible.
Well, along those lines, I'd also suggest that you consider, and the rest of the council consider, having not 1 but 2 people from P&Z in a sort of chair, vice chair kind of role, so that there's continuity. If these
Agreed.
meetings are frequent, it could be that somebody's just not available, and you know, we need to keep things moving, it sounds like.
Sure. I personally would strongly recommend that to council, but I guess I would like to hear council's thoughts on that particular approach.
Yeah, I would confirm, great idea to let P&Z do those interviews.
And have 2 P&Z members, chair and vice chair, by almost like by title, not up for vote by the committee, the task force. It's theirs by virtue of the position they already hold. Is that right?
I agree.
The last sort of comment, question is, there was some discussion about the proposal as written had a lot of consideration for the institutions, and I've heard that there's certainly an acknowledgement of their importance and their unique role in their impacts to our residents, but that they don't necessarily need those set reserved roster spots. I do want to, if that's correct, I do want to let council know that once we have the consultant on board, we're certainly going to be able to hammer down more specific ways. There are certainly options for getting that stakeholder input through ways other than just this task force. And frankly, we have options there too that frankly, we don't need to come back to council to decide. The P&Z and the team can help shape that. Either that's through individual communications with individual stakeholders. Maybe we have a meeting for all the churches at once. Maybe there's different ways to approach that. But yeah, I would sort of build on what Councilor Sheldon said and add that we could even structure some specific types of feedback channels for those stakeholders that don't necessarily rise to the level of council appointments.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I think Randy, I think you mentioned that maybe Afshin, you did, that Kent has been a good steward here and a good partner with our community. I couldn't agree more. It's an excellent point. And whether it's Kent or St. Mary's, if we don't give them a seat at the table, so to speak, that's okay. But let's proactively reach out to them. Let's have some meetings
Agreed.
that include the churches, clubs, schools. Give them those electronic message boards, ways to give us feedback specific to their issues that they're dealing with. Let's make sure that they know that their voice is being heard, keeping in mind that our citizens are the taxpayers. They're the ones who we need to also be focusing on those 6,000 residents.
Well, one benefit of this approach versus what was in the packet, there's already been discussion on some of the communication with P&Z members about the roster makeup, about the equestrian community and the art commission. So if you do start setting aside reserved spots, if you don't literally set aside a reserved spot for everybody under the sun, you risk alienating folks right out of the gate.
That's why it's not a good idea.
Yeah,
I mean,
so I
these
think
should be
there's a
considerations.
benefit to that.
These should be considerations when you're making the appointments, but not reserve spots. I think is the way to go. Now, the question actually, you didn't answer Mr. Sheldon's question. Was what is the mission, and which is Mr. Iverson's point too. That's going to make a difference about who wants to be on this committee. What are they going to be doing? And who's going to decide that? And maybe, I'm happy to have P&Z come up with that mission because they're the ones who are doing this. I'd like to hear what they have to say about it because I don't want to take over their job for them. But I do. And then the other question I have is, well, first, what's the mission? And second, how many members? I mean, we could have 7 by the P&Z. We could have 7 from council. That would be 14. That's maybe one way to go, and that would be kind of divide the appointments. Any other thoughts?
I think that makes a lot of sense, and particularly if this is going to be, if it is a sounding board for planning and zoning primarily, then I think letting them, they're tasked with the master plan. If they think they need a group of citizens to do X, Y, and Z, and they're going to do A, B, and Z, great. And they can kind of divide that up however they like, so I like that idea. And I also really like the idea, that along the lines of what I was sort of envisioning as well, where there's some other channel for communication with them. And it is more than just, well, they're public meetings and anybody can come and you could have seen it posted, right? It's more than that. And that really allows them the flexibility to be as involved or not as they would like.
Hey, Jessica, from a timing standpoint, if we wait till February 11th, we've got to get this into the next crier.
It is.
Right, but to Russ's point, you can't just throw it out there and say, okay, well, if you're interested, apply. Well, what's the job description? We got to get a little bit of context in that application publication. So I don't know how we're going to do that, but we've got to keep that ball moving.
Right now, I think the general idea is, I don't think the crier actually ever has a full job description laid out in it. I'm looking at staff again to correct me or kick me under the table if I'm wrong. It's a little bit more generic. You're interested in helping shape the future of the community, and it's a little bit more short and to the point. With that said, though, I do think there is an opportunity to work with the P&Z on the February 11th before the deadline closes on February 28th to hammer out a lot of the what's their mission, what role will their input have, the number of meeting times. Again, we still don't have a consultant on board yet, and so some of that is going to have to be sequenced out a little bit. But I do think there's a way to actually accommodate this kind of conversation with the P&Z in time to still help shape those interviews. Does that sound right?
Yeah. That's fine, as long as we have to your point, I get it. Yeah, do you want to be on PTRC? Do you want this advisory committee? But if we could put a little bit of context, what they'll be working, what they'll be doing, the time frame, without getting too deep into the weeds.
Sure.
Maybe it's a quick link in that article with 100 words or less about the job description, and for more information about the master planning process, click here. And I know it's not an online version for a lot of people, but they can go on and type it in into their computer and actually
update that as we.
Yeah, we don't have it yet. So.
Yeah. No, but we can pull something out of like our scope of work for the master plan consultant that'll talk about the big picture of the village and stuff like that, but something to give an applicant some meat to it.
Well, and then let's consult with the chair and vice chair of the P&Z too, and say, please help us. You need to kind of come up with your mission, what you expect the citizens. How can they best help you perform your mission in preparing the master plan? I think that's right. Is that ambiguous and
No, I
muddy
actually-
enough for you?
To be honest with you, no, council, I got to tell you, I think that there's a fairly shared vision here. We're all laughing. I really actually think that there's a lot of agreement coming from council on how this might want to look. So I think this will be able to, I know that we have P&Z representation here tonight. So I think there'll be an opportunity for us to pass along council's thoughts, but then get our own independent input from P&Z as well. So all in time, I think, before an interview would take place in March.
Does it make any sense to ask P&Z if they have any input to share on this tonight? Member of P&Z?
Certainly can. He's sitting right there, Mr. Holland. If you'd like to say anything, here's your time. Your thoughts.
Earl Holland, 3 Vista Road. No, I think it's been a great discussion, and I was really interested, and it kind of went the way that I thought it would go. Full disclosure, I shared a number of thoughts with Chris already, and I suspect partly he's sitting there going, I think this guy's already talked to these people, because a lot of what you've been saying I raised. And in particular, I raised the point both with the city manager and going, what are you going to say? Hey, do you want to volunteer? We're going to have a master plan, and we're not going to tell you anything about it. Just send in your resumes. When you haven't figured out what is this task force going to do. And I really do think that that's a critical thing at the end of the day. I kind of heard, and I think that makes sense, which is a sounding board for a lot of the work that the consultant and staff are going to do in conjunction with P&Z, who will provide the leadership, and that it will be a sounding board. But that's a critical thing to communicate to them. In other words, said another way to say, which is you're not communicating to them, you guys are going to decide what this city does, because that ain't what's going to happen. It's going to be a sounding board, and stuff will be accepted or won't be accepted. The other thing that I think is important, and a number of you have heard me say this many times before, when we interview for people, we love our volunteers. We'll say that as much as we need to. I'm a volunteer. I don't know how many people love me, but I mean, we love our volunteers, but when we're done singing their praises, there's got to be, but this is a big deal for the city, and you will be expected to do the work. Now, will you? And that's a critical thing when we interview these people. That doesn't mean that we don't love them, but I don't want to see a committee of 14 or 18 and 9 show up and 8 show up. That's actually disrespectful to the people that do show up and disrespectful to our residents, what have you. So it is critical that as we go through this master plan process, that we make it clear that whatever the roles are, people need to do the work. And just one other comment, I know Chris knows this too. I've also expressed that as the newest member of P&Z to P&Z and said, if we're going to lead this process, we ain't going to do it once a month. And I haven't gotten a lot of feedback on that point yet, but I think that's a critical thing. So everything you guys said, I think makes a lot of sense, and I do think that Chris got a lot of good feedback, I think, at this point. So, you bet.
Mr. Kramer, you think you have what you need? Oh. Think you have what you need? And do you want us, council members here to be obviously we should be thinking about our own if we want people we want to approach and
Assuming P&Z agrees with the idea that council people will get the opportunity to have a direct appointment from each one of your districts, I would encourage you to start thinking about who you might want to reach out to now in an effort. Maybe there's an opportunity to fill that half of the roster, prior to the appointments through the application process.
I agree. Good.
And I would also suggest that you may not only reach out to them, but also encourage them to apply, just in the event something happens and their name would be on the list.
Right. Okay, agenda item 10E. This is Laura.
Good evening, Mayor Stewart, members of City Council. The next regular municipal election will be this November, and the positions that will be on the ballot are Mayor, District 1, District 3, and District 5. All the incumbents are not term limited and able to run again. We currently don't have any ballot measures, but staff is asking for direction from council if there are any issues that you would like staff to start researching in an effort to get ahead of the timeline and get all that information if there are any topics that might come up for ballot measures. Staff has also included a calendar, timeline, and happy to answer any questions about that. And staff and the city attorney will be working on any campaign finance related council bills as needed based on the recent state legislation. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Gillespie?
I don't have a question, but one quick comment as it relates to that. Our code is almost silent on campaign finance, and it was never really an issue in the past, but it is now, and I think we need to nail that down.
Yeah, just late last month, the Denver District Court issued a decision, but it was on the Secretary of State rule, not on what was slid into state law. Some would say the analysis for the District Court decision would hold now that it's in state law, but it's going to be unsettled here for a little while, so we'll figure out how to navigate it. I'm keeping tabs on it.
'Cause I know, and I don't necessarily have specific thoughts on what things should be, but there aren't contribution limits. We don't necessarily talk about committees, which has arisen as an issue in our community, and whatever the policy is, we just need to have one.
Yeah.
That
and
people
we have
can
some-
follow consistently and,
There's some constitutional issues because it really should be handled by the Secretary of State if you go by some strict letter of the law. But we'll figure that out.
Okay.
That's the big issue is who's going to enforce. We still don't know who's going to enforce campaign finance for cities.
Yet we don't know.
The Secretary of State said, well, not me.
Right.
So
Right.
a lot of open questions.
Yeah.
Okay. We are concluding the item 10E, so we're moving to item 11, which is I recess the meeting of the Cherry Hills Village City Council now at 8:52, and call to order a meeting of the Cherry Hills Village Charlevoix Park Third Filing General Improvement District Board. Roll call.
Board Member Safavi?
Here.
Board Member Wheel?
Here.
Board Member Brown?
Here.
Chair Stewart?
Here.
Board Member Gallagher?
Here.
Board Member Sheldon?
Here.
Board Member Blum?
Here.
All right, we'll take up consent agenda item 13A. Does anybody want to remove it, or do I hear a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? No discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That passes unanimously. Take it unless there's new business, we will adjourn the meeting at 8:57. 8:58. Now reconvene the meeting of Cherry Hills Village City Council. Reports. I have brief report. As I mentioned last time, we had Commissioner Conte had a public meeting. There was lots of discussion about the jail and what to do with it since that ballot issue failed, and they're looking at options, not really sure what they're going to do. Lots of discussion about the opioid epidemic, which Commissioner Conte is personally involved with. The big issue really is there will be a new judicial district now. Currently it's 18 with Arapahoe, Elbert, and Kiowa. And Douglas. No, Arapahoe. Yeah. Arapahoe, Douglas, and Kiowa. They're going to create a new district, be the first new district in 50 years. It'll be 23rd district and Arapahoe will remain the 18th on its own. So that is definitely, according to the commissioners, this coming. Probably a 5-year process, but it will certainly come. That means we'll have a new DA, and I don't know if they'll have a new. I'm not sure what it's going to mean for the jail. We will have a new DA in Arapahoe County too, because Brockler is term limited, so that's coming this year. I attended the Metro Mayor's Conference annual retreat. It was at the Opera Colorado offices on Oxford and Santa Fe in Inglewood. Very nice facility they have. Governor Polis spoke, talked about transportation funding, kind of put a wet damper on ideas of regional solutions to transportation, and said, we need a statewide solution. And I think he did say they're going to spend more from the general fund for transportation, which is interesting. So his budget increases the money for roads. He also talked about across-the-board tax cuts, interesting, and eliminating some exemptions. So he may be at odds with the Democrats there. Also, Majority Leader Casey Becker was there and talked about legislative issues, and again was not thinking that. There is House Bill 201151, which expands authority for regional transportation improvements, which would give authority of DRCOG basically be a taxing entity. It wouldn't increase taxes; they'd have to vote on it, but it'd allow an entity like DRCOG to do transportation and road improvements in its district. Again, that's a district-wide. So she was saying, this is a statewide issue, and so it's. The Colorado Municipal League obviously thinks that we need, we need regional solutions because statewide solutions aren't passing the voters, and regional solutions tend to pass voters. Statewide solutions don't. So, and local governments maintain 3/4 of all the roads in the state, and and the state maintains 25%, but they get 90% of all the General Assembly funding. So, anyway. It's an issue to me up. It doesn't sound like we're going to get much support from the mayor, the governor, or the majority leader. She also talked about family leave, and we emphasized how difficult that will be for cities and small cities, particularly if that really passes in the form that it came in last year. It could be devastating to the budgets of municipalities to have to keep open positions. Small municipalities keep open positions for family leave and pay another person and deal with that. So, a lot of discussion there too about expected ballot proposals for limiting growth, and they're they're coming. This is a big popular thing now, and they're all modeled on Lakewood and Golden models. Everybody is opposed to them. Housing groups are opposed, conservation groups, realtor groups, developer groups. Everybody is opposed, and they pass anyway because they're very popular. And the discussion, I think, correctly so, is that a lot of this is the result of the failure to fix the traffic congestion in the roads. If those had been fixed, if the congestion had been addressed and some of those ballot measures had passed, people probably wouldn't be so upset about the growth. But they're not fixing it, and so the only solution I think voters have is, hey, let's just limit growth. That's the solution. So, it's a difficult problem. On the 16th, we hosted here the Highline Canal Working Group, and I'll let Councilor Sheldon talk more about that, but there's good news on that front. And we'll be coming forward to council with some approvals and some appointments and things like that. I'll let Councilor Sheldon address that. The next day, we met with the Arapahoe County Commissioners, Mayors, and City Managers. Megan Dollar, who's taking over Kevin Bomer's position on the CML, gave us a legislative update. A big one that is kind of a surprise for us was that the plaintiffs' bar has proposed an analogous 1983 action for violations of state constitution, which is, it's all about attorney's fees. So they can sue you on a violation of the state constitution, now get attorney fees, and that's what they want. That would be a huge hit for cities. I mean, right now that doesn't exist. So also, there's a lot of discussion about arbitration. The plaintiffs' attorneys are coming forward with limitations on arbitration agreements for consumer contracts and employment issues, trying to scale back on the ability to arbitrate those and get more provisions for attorney fees and push the things into court. That's it. Looking ahead, I think on the 23rd, we're having the Arapahoe County Transportation Forum. I think we usually go to the executive board meeting, and Dan, and you go. Yeah. Okay. Oh, great. Okay. Councilor Gallagher, we there. Excellent. And then next Friday we have the CML Executive Board meeting, and we'll have an update on that. We'll be bringing forward to council some discussion about Bellevue Station and the Union off-ramps. I think, see when we can get those guys in line. Greenwood Village was mentioned at our meeting that's the top priority for them is to redo the interchange there at Bellevue, and the solution they're proposing has off ramps onto Union. and we just need to kind of understand what it is. We've asked them their engineers and come in and talk to us and tell us why that won't increase cut-through traffic in Cherry Hills Village. And I think that was it. And I know, Chief, I was might say something about your posting for positions and things like that. That would be welcome when you like. Councilor Blum.
Yeah. As far as transportation, our state representative is having a town hall this Saturday at Coble Library at Orchard and Holly, discussing the same issues. And I'm going to attend that and see if we can get any feedback that the state legislature may be giving as far as the Bellevue and I-25 off-ramp.
Okay, just two things. The Highline Canal, we did have a real productive meeting here in this room last week, and what came out of it was the new name for our governance group is called the Canal Collaborative, and the Canal Collaborative is going to have essentially 3 levels, or 3 tiers, if you will, of management. The first one will be electeds from each of the jurisdictions, including, I believe, the districts will have representation on that, as well as, obviously, as Denver Water. Denver Water will remain the owner of the canal, which was a real concern of mine, at least, throughout 2019, because the thought of Denver Water no longer owning the canal and giving ownership to some thought of a new district was kind of neat, like creating a district that's 71 miles long and X amount of feet deep off the center line of the canal. That sounded neat, but could you imagine trying to create that new district at this point in time with all the residents and businesses and whatnot? So that was very welcoming news that has now been finalized. The other 2 tiers will be a staff, management staff level person, I think is the right way to maybe describe that. Yeah, and then there's the workers, the worker bees that are going to be cranking out a lot of the work product. A couple of the other highlights of that meeting, each local jurisdiction will retain its authority to do what it's already been doing on the canal or not have authority, right? So we will still be coordinating on the recreational piece, while Denver Water will still be in charge of their canal portion of it. It's a voluntary program. The jurisdictions do not have a requirement to be in there. Any monies that do come in from our city, residents is a little different. I was going to ask the question of Harriet. I haven't asked this yet, but if our city decides to put $100 into the Canal Collaborative, that $100 will be used within the city of Cherry Hills, 3 miles of canal. Won't be shipped off and used in Aurora or one of the counties. I think that's it on the highlights of that. Did I miss anything on that you wanted to expand on?
No, I think it's good news because Denver Water will continue to own title to the Highline Canal. That solved a lot of problems.
Yeah.
So right then it's easy to get an agreement, with people. But we still have to. We'll come to council and ask for appointments. So there'll be one of us who will be appointed to this, and there's also our staff to the other level, and then to the advisory committee. We'll have input on that. But we'll always have a voice at the table, which is really good. And I think it's going to be much easier that Denver Water is staying involved in this. And I think working out the details. There is a timeline this spring. Appointments will be made February, March. Actually, it will come back to us for approval of this whole framework probably at the next meeting, and then after that, we'll and maybe appointments who we want to appoint to that board, and then that board will then create the documents, the kind of organizational documents for how things will work.
Yeah.
And then the committee itself, the Highline Canal Conservancy, will sunset itself, and it'll be no longer been meeting for many years.
Right, that will eventually go away. The working group will go away.
Working group will go away.
Yeah.
One quick clarification.
Yeah.
When you mention, that funds raised from each community are going to stay in that community, funds provided by counties, are those county-wide or only in unincorporated?
That's a good question, Katie. I don't know the answer to that. So if Arapahoe County donated $100,000, does it go to all the cities within the counties, or does it stay in the unincorporated portion of the county?
It depends.
I don't know that's been
I mean,
hashed
obviously
out.
they
I think
have
the
a lot
I
more
think
money
the
and they have.
typically, if it's just a Arapahoe County resident donating $100,000, I'm guessing that's going to stay in the Arapahoe County. If it's actually the county itself, usually they're going to be donating to a specific project, and then those monies are earmarked for that project,
If it were a
whatever
grant.
city or region they're in.
Yeah. Okay. And I don't know, the one other nuance to it I don't know is if we had a donor that was a village resident that donated $1 million. I would think that it stays in the city of Cherry Hills, but I don't know that for certain. Did you hear that for certain? Okay.
It would be on the request of the donor.
Right, okay.
But certainly the opportunity to leave it in the city would be
Yeah.
there for them.
Only other update is Mike Gallagher and I have been working a little bit on possibility of doing some expanded undergrounding, not in the form of our rebates that we get from Excel, but potentially in the form of another GID, another general improvement district like we have with Charlevoix. We met with staff on it last week. Was that last week? Last week, and trying to get a little bit of a better understanding as to what's entailed with that process. And it is a big process, and we're taking it under advisement before we move anything forward or present anything to any neighborhoods for discussion. So we're thinking on it. Yeah, okay. With regards to that GID, one thing we did decide to do, and I don't know if we have it built in, maybe you know this, do we have a article being created for the GID, for the Village Crier?
We have it on the list for March.
March, okay. So the idea there was to, at the very least, put something out there in the crier that says, hey, citizens, we want to make you aware of a process that we just went through in 2018 and 19. We formed a general improvement district, or I should say residents of our community formed a general improvement district for the purpose of financing the burial of some overhead power lines, putting them underground. And it was a successful process, and maybe a couple bullet points about how it went. And for more information or to learn more about how to form a new GID, please contact, Jessica or Chris or Jim or somebody, I don't know. Not me. And then the other thing we're going to do, thanks Mike for these notes here, the other thing that we're going to do on that, we are going to make sure that we somehow include the process in our master plan, that it is an available tool for our communities if they would like to explore financing a piece of public infrastructure. It doesn't even have to be undergrounding of lines. That tool is out there. We've tried it and tested it, albeit once and small with Charlevoix, but we've tried and tested it now, and it's working. So that's my update.
So I had the opportunity to go through Jim's year-end council update and the 2020 work plan, and I was reflecting as I was reading through this thing that this is the last time this guy's going to do this for us. And I am so grateful for what you've done for us for the last 4 years. And this document just evidences it very clearly, looking back and looking forward. And so with gratitude, I'm just really grateful for your experience, your leadership, and the mark you'll leave on this community.
Thank you for that. I will just say that the people also sitting in this room had much more to do with the accomplishments on those lists than personally I did. So my thanks goes to them as well.
I don't really have anything to report, just thanks to staff. There have been a couple of little issues in my neck of the woods, and I think staff's done a great job of dealing with those, so thank you for that.
Couple of things. I did have a chance to meet with the First Church folks. I think they extended an invitation to council members. I checked with Kathy to make sure I was on the right side of the issue, and she gave me good advice on that. But it was an interesting conversation. I'll spare you the details, but if you haven't had a chance to chat with him, it's probably worthwhile. Dr. Cog, there was a mention from an Excel employee who was commenting about Excel putting a large number of towers in the general Denver metropolitan area to monitor water meters and electric meters, electric meters. And apparently these things are fairly tall. Could be taller than even some of the cell phone towers we've been talking about. I don't know much about, they didn't provide a lot of detail, and perhaps we know about that, but it seems like it would be something we should find out about if we don't. I could either do it, or if you already have somebody on it, it'd be great to understand what's up before it happens. Jim?
Yeah, I don't know anything about this one in particular, but I do know in other jurisdictions I've worked at, utility companies have put up additional poles to read meters and read Wi-Fi through Wi-Fi so that they don't have to send somebody out and walk the streets and figure out what everybody's gas or electricity is at. And that's my suspect of what this is, but we can follow up with Excel on it.
I think it would be good to get a sense of what their plan is for our neighborhood. Excellent. Englewood spent some time talking about a big project that they're kicking off to rebuild the 285 and Broadway intersection. Not exactly in our community, but certainly affects a major artery that's adjacent. So it's 285 and Broadway. Planning starts this year in 2020, and the expected construction is 2022, 2023 completion. Douglas County talked about a couple of things. They have something called a community response team. It's comprised of a law enforcement official plus a paramedic plus a caseworker. And my sense was that they get involved where there are domestic issues, mental health issues, things like that. About 700 cases in the past year, past 3 years, and they believe they've saved about $1 million rather in emergency room costs. So it sounded like a kind of an interesting concept. No arrests made. All the problems were sort of worked through alternative channels. They also mentioned their emergency vehicle driver training track, apparently one of a handful in the country. They were proud of that and proud of a $13.5 million multi-jurisdictional crime lab as well. And the other agenda item that took some time was going through some of the legislation that's being proposed in front of the State House. More a matter of, is this something we should take a position on? Is it something we should support? Is it something we should advocate against? Spirited discussion, but not a lot of surprises in there. Local community decision-making being a key driver of what they were advocating. That's all I have.
No report.
City Manager?
Just one comment with regards to the Bellevue I-25 interchange. I'm still having discussions with Greenwood Village and the consultants about coming to City Hall here and doing a presentation. I'm going to say at best it'll be late February, but it could be March or even April. So that gives you a time frame.
Chief?
So we've had an officer tender his resignation, Officer Sheldon Gardner. His wife has accepted a new position, and they've reevaluated what they want to do as a family. So Sheldon made that decision. I think it was real tough for him, and he's a good officer, so it will be tough for us to fill his position. But I've already been working with Catherine Ducharme. We've got it posted, and I've trying to turn my entire police department into a recruiting tool. So let us know if you know anybody or send them our way.
Mr. Goldie?
If I may take us back to the Citizens Advisory Task Force application, we actually included the application, just a generic application, in the February issue of the Village Crier, which has printed. So the application itself will be very generic, but staff can work together on creating a website page that goes on the website. We can send out an email blast that contains the mission statement from Planning and Zoning as soon as they form one. So I just didn't want council to be surprised when you see the February issue and the application's actually in it.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. City Attorney. No report. Okay. Unless there's other business, we need a motion.
And normally, when I do this, I say upon conclusion adjourning, but it looks like that we're not going to do that. So, okay. Okay, so just make this one, okay. I move that we move into executive session pursuant to CRS Section 24-6-4024C, 24-6-4024E, and 24-6-4024F for the purpose of discussing matters required to be kept confidential by CRS Section 24-72-204, 3A11A, personnel matters, and developing strategy for negotiations and instructing negotiators concerning the city manager position.
Second.
We need a voice vote, roll call vote.
Counselor Wheel?
Yes.
Counselor Brown?
Yes.
Counselor Gallagher?
Yes.
Counselor Sheldon?
Yes.
Counselor Blum? Yes. Counselor Safavi?
Yes.
Okay, that passes unanimously. So we will stand adjourned, and we will stand in recess, and possibly to reconvene after our executive session. Thank you all for coming.